The movie Final Destination Bloodlines has quickly become one of the most talked about releases of the year, and for good reason. Audiences everywhere have been waiting for the next installment in the Final Destination franchise, and this film delivers on suspense, shocking moments, and a storyline that pushes the well-known formula in new directions. Today we are going to dive deep into everything you need to know about this movie. From its story and cast performances to its behind-the-scenes details like production, music, and budget, this overview will give you the complete picture. If you are curious about what makes this horror thriller stand out, stay with me as we go step by step through its highlights. The story of Final Destination Bloodlines continues the franchise tradition of exploring how fate cannot be escaped no matter how hard one tries. This time the plot revolves around a group of characters who narrowly survive a deadly accident only to find themselves hunted down one by mysterious and terrifying circumstances. The narrative builds tension by showing how each survivor struggles to cheat death, but as the previous films have taught us, death always finds a way. While keeping the suspense alive, the movie adds new twists and updates the formula to appeal to modern audiences, creating a balance between nostalgia for fans and fresh storytelling for new viewers. One of the most interesting aspects of this film is the cast. The actors bring intensity and realism to their roles, making the audience feel connected to their fears and struggles. Each character is distinct, with believable personalities that make their situations even more gripping. Performances from both leading and supporting actors stand out, with a few breakout roles that will likely be remembered long after the credits roll. In particular, the chemistry among the main group of survivors enhances the suspense, as the audience feels invested in their relationships and wants to see how they manage to face the terror closing in on them. The production of Final Destination Bloodlines was an ambitious effort. Pre-production planning took considerable time, as the creative team wanted to honor the legacy of the earlier films while also giving this entry its own identity. Locations were carefully chosen to heighten the eerie atmosphere, and practical effects were blended with modern visual effects to create realistic and shocking sequences. The attention to detail in design and staging of the accident scenes is a major highlight, ensuring that audiences are kept on the edge of their seats. Music plays a vital role in heightening the tension. The score is designed to build suspense, often starting quietly and slowly rising in intensity before unleashing a dramatic climax that matches the on-screen events. The soundtrack enhances not only the horror sequences but also the quieter moments where characters reflect on their situation, adding emotional depth. By combining chilling compositions with atmospheric sound design, the movie's audio elements contribute heavily to the overall impact. Filming took place over several months with a strong focus on creating visually striking scenes. The cinematography is sharp and polished, capturing the intensity of both large-scale disaster moments and small intimate character exchanges. Post-production further elevated the visuals through editing and effects work, creating smooth pacing and dramatic sequences that flow together seamlessly. The editing ensures that the film maintains suspense without dragging, delivering an experience that keeps viewers engaged from start to finish. From a financial perspective, the budget was carefully allocated to balance production value with cost control. The filmmakers invested heavily in visual effects and stunt work, both of which are crucial to a Final Destination movie. The result is a polished product that looks bigger than its budget would suggest. At the box office, Final Destination Bloodlines has performed strongly, drawing in both longtime fans of the series and new horror enthusiasts. Its success shows that the franchise still has a strong following and continues to captivate audiences worldwide. When it comes to the story's impact, this film is both terrifying and thought-provoking. It challenges the idea of control and destiny, reminding viewers that no matter how carefully we plan, life often has other ideas. The plot offers not only moments of shock and fear but also themes of survival, guilt, and the human instinct to fight against the inevitable. These elements make it more than just a horror movie, turning it into a layered narrative that leaves viewers reflecting long after it ends. As for a review of the film, Final Destination Bloodlines can be described as thrilling, intense, and faithful to the spirit of the series. The scares are creative, the performances are solid, and the technical departments deliver quality work across the board. The pacing keeps you locked in, and the twists ensure that the story remains unpredictable. Fans of the franchise will appreciate the callbacks to earlier films, while newcomers will find plenty of thrills to keep them entertained. In conclusion, Final Destination Bloodlines stands as a strong entry in the horror franchise. From its detailed production to its gripping performances and chilling soundtrack, everything works together to create an unforgettable experience. The film successfully combines nostalgia with innovation, making it a must-watch for horror fans. Whether you are drawn to the storyline, the suspense, or the technical achievements, this movie delivers in every department and proves that the Final Destination series still has the power to shock and excite audiences. Final Destination Bloodlines opens with a tense prologue set in 1969 when Iris Campbell experiences a vivid premonition of the Skyview Tower collapsing and acts to warn and save the people inside, an intervention that disturbs Death's intended order and establishes the film's central mystery about inherited fate. Decades later, the main plot follows college student Stefani Reyes, played by Caitlin Santawana, who is tormented by recurring nightmares that mirror that averted disaster and returns home determined to understand what connects her family to the old vision. Stefani finds a household that includes her younger brother Charlie, portrayed by Teo Briones, and extended relatives whose lives are entangled with the Skyview incident. Eric Campbell, played by Richard Harmon, Bobby Campbell, played by Owen Patrick Joyner, Julia Campbell, played by Anna Lohr, and their parents and guardians including Darlene, played by Rhea Kilstedt, Howard, played by Alex Zahara, and Brenda, played by April Telek. Breck Bassinger appears as a young Iris in flashbacks, while Gabrielle Rose plays the older Iris who has withdrawn and chronicled accidents in a notebook, and Tony Todd returns as William Bloodworth in a role that links this chapter to the franchise mythology. Iris reveals a ledger of incidents and near misses that she has kept for decades, a detailed record that identifies patterns and suggests a new explanation for why survivors in Final Destination films keep being hunted. By saving the original victims in 1969, Iris allowed several bloodlines to continue that Death never intended, and Death is now systematically correcting that error by targeting descendants in the order they would have died. That idea reframes the franchise's familiar set pieces as a multi-generational cleanup operation and gives the plot a motive that ties together past installments and the present danger. The movie leans into the series' trademark Rube Goldberg-style fatalities, combining mundane objects and cascading accidents into inventive and gruesome deaths intended to feel plausible enough to be unsettling. One sequence highlighted involves a tattoo artist who becomes trapped by a nose ring and is consumed by flames, a brutal example of how the film turns ordinary situations into horrific outcomes. Narratively, the film alternates between flashbacks that explain Iris's decades of research and tense present-day set pieces in which Stefani and her relatives try to anticipate Death's order and break the chain, attempting strategies that include isolation, swapping places, and relying on Iris's notes to predict the next move. As with other entries in the franchise, cleverness provides only temporary advantage, and survival often hinges on timing and chance as much as planning, which keeps the tension high and the audience guessing. The emotional core centers on family, Stefani's determination to protect her brother and cousins, and Iris's guilt and stubborn hope that knowledge might be enough to outsmart fate, giving weight to the set pieces and elevating the stakes beyond spectacle. The climax brings together a desperate gambit informed by Iris's research, a tense sequence of choices and sacrifices that resolves the immediate threat while leaving the larger concept of bloodlines open enough to allow future continuations of the mythos. Critics praised the film for balancing thoughtful franchise expansion with effective scares, and audiences responded to the blend of familial drama and inventive death scenes, helping the film post robust box office returns, underscoring the franchise's appeal. Stefani's search leads her to a fortified compound where Iris has isolated herself for years and is revealed to be terminally ill, having spent decades compiling a notebook and letters to teach her descendants how to recognize patterns. The movie explicitly nods to prior franchise disasters in Iris's research, referencing incidents such as the Route 23 pileup and the Flight 180 crash to give the Bloodlines theory historical context. In short, Final Destination Bloodlines tells a full story about how one act of salvation in 1969 ripples through generations, forcing a new group of characters to race against an ancestral pattern of fatality while relying on Iris's notes, Stefani's bravery, and the performances of a cast that mixes newcomers and returning franchise figures to deliver both emotional resonance and gruesome spectacle. Final Destination Bloodlines begins with an opening image that sets the tone immediately. The year is 1969 and Iris Campbell, a young woman plagued by visions, experiences a terrifying premonition of the Skyview Tower collapsing. Her panic and determination save lives, but the choice to intervene disturbs the natural order of death, laying the foundation for everything that follows. This moment is both the setup and the first suggestion that the movie will examine the ripple effects of choices made decades earlier. By starting with a historical tragedy that never fully happened, the narrative plants a seed of inevitability that colors the rest of the film. The inciting incident arrives when the story shifts to the present day, focusing on college student Stefani Reyes. She is haunted by vivid nightmares that mirror the events Iris once foresaw. Returning home to her family, Stefani uncovers connections between her lineage and the Skyview disaster. These revelations awaken the dormant force of death, which begins hunting her and her relatives one by one. At this stage, the audience is pulled into the question of why death is targeting them now, and the inciting incident clearly establishes the stakes. Survival is no longer about a single accident but about an inherited curse. The rising action is carefully constructed, balancing discovery and suspense. Stefani reunites with her brother Charlie and extended relatives, including cousins Eric, Bobby, and Julia Campbell. When accidents begin to occur around them, Iris re-emerges as an older woman who has isolated herself with decades of research. She reveals a chilling theory that by saving those doomed in 1969, she accidentally created bloodlines that were never supposed to exist. Now death is returning to erase the mistake. This turning point escalates the tension because it reframes the threat not as random but as calculated. Each death that follows is more than a spectacle. It is a correction in a ledger that was written long ago. From here, the film structures its narrative around a series of escalating set pieces. Each character's death is staged with the franchise's trademark attention to detail, turning everyday objects into instruments of fate. A notable mid-film sequence involves a tattoo parlor, where a minor mishap spirals into a horrifying blaze. Scenes like this are more than just shock value, they highlight the theme that life's smallest accidents can snowball into inevitability. These moments also create emotional peaks, as the audience sees not just fear but defiance and desperation in the characters' final moments. The midpoint of the story delivers a critical twist. Stefani, with Iris's notes, believes she has discovered a way to alter the sequence by willingly taking another's place in death's order. This is the kind of narrative pivot that shifts the audience's understanding, offering the illusion of control. For a brief stretch, the survivors experiment with strategies to trick or confuse death, from isolating themselves to switching roles. These attempts inject hope into the rising dread, but as the franchise tradition dictates, hope only delays the inevitable. The mid-film turn reinforces the central theme: no one escapes for long. As the film moves into its second half, the narrative emphasizes family bonds as both strength and weakness. Stefani's determination to protect Charlie drives much of the tension, while Iris's guilt provides emotional weight. Flashbacks to Iris's younger days punctuate the present timeline, giving the film a slightly non-linear feel. By weaving in past and present, the narrative deepens the mythology and gives audiences a sense of continuity with earlier installments of the series. The structure is deliberate. Every flashback provides not just exposition but emotional resonance, making Iris's lifelong burden more tragic and more powerful. The climax builds to a desperate gambit. Using Iris's research, Stefani and the surviving family members set a trap of sorts, hoping to redirect death's order. The sequence is taut with suspense, filled with false victories and sudden reversals. In typical Final Destination fashion, just when it seems the characters have found a way to cheat fate, a minor overlooked detail unravels their plan. The finale closes the loop on the opening, showing that despite decades of knowledge and preparation, death remains relentless and impartial. The audience is left with both shock and inevitability, a reminder that the series thrives on the tension between hope and futility. The final beat of the movie is deliberately ambiguous. After the climactic deaths, a surviving character briefly believes they have escaped the cycle, only for a subtle visual cue to suggest otherwise. This closing image ties the story back to the franchise's DNA, ending on unease rather than resolution. It also sets the stage for possible sequels, leaving audiences debating whether the Bloodlines theory is truly finished or just beginning. What makes the narrative engaging is not just the inventive fatalities but the structure of how information is revealed. By choosing to withhold Iris's full explanation until partway through the film, the story creates mystery and suspense. By alternating between present events and flashbacks, it plays with time to build sympathy for Iris and heighten the audience's understanding of Stefani's fight. These narrative choices make the film feel more layered than a straightforward linear story. In the end, Final Destination Bloodlines succeeds as both a chilling horror film and a narrative expansion of the franchise's mythos. The careful pacing, key turning points, and emotional peaks give the plot weight beyond spectacle. The deliberate gaps in the story, particularly the ambiguous ending, leave room for interpretation and conversation, ensuring that audiences leave not just startled but intrigued. It is a journey that begins with one woman's fateful vision and ends with a haunting reminder that destiny is never truly avoided. Final Destination Bloodlines grounds its horror not only in the spectacle of elaborate death sequences, but also in the characters who bring emotional weight to the story. At its core, the film is about people trapped in a cycle they cannot control, and the development of these characters reveals how different personalities respond to inevitability. By the end, some grow stronger while others collapse under the pressure, making the journey as much psychological as it is physical. The protagonist, Stefani Reyes, begins the movie as a young college student plagued by unsettling dreams. At first she is simply a curious and worried individual who wants to understand why her visions feel so real. Her motivation is deeply personal. She wants to protect her younger brother Charlie and ensure that her family does not fall apart. What stands in her way is not just death itself but her own doubts and the skepticism of those around her. Early in the film she is portrayed as uncertain, second-guessing her instincts, but her determination grows once Iris reveals the truth about the bloodlines. A subtle moment that signals her shift is when Stefani insists on reading Iris's old notebooks herself, taking ownership of the fight rather than waiting for someone else to lead. By the end she is transformed into a figure of resilience, someone willing to take risks and sacrifices for her loved ones, though the film leaves her fate ambiguous. Her arc is a tragic one but shows her evolution from passive dreamer to active protector. Charlie, her younger brother, functions as both motivation and burden. At the beginning he is portrayed as carefree and slightly rebellious, not taking Stefani's warnings seriously. His want is simple. He craves independence and wants to live a normal life without being defined by family tragedies. What stands in his way is the crushing reality that his bloodline has made him a target. Over the course of the film, Charlie's arc is subtler but still significant. A turning point arrives when he witnesses a cousin's gruesome death and his denial gives way to terror. His bond with Stefani deepens during the second half of the movie, and an offhand line where he admits he should have listened to her earlier shows his growth. By the finale, Charlie is less defiant and more cooperative, a shift that underscores how trauma has forced him to mature. Iris Campbell represents both wisdom and guilt. Introduced in flashbacks as a frightened young woman, her older self is hardened by decades of research and isolation. Her want is redemption. She wishes to undo the consequences of her choice in 1969. What stands in her way is time itself, as she is frail, ill, and running out of years to fix what was broken. Her character is layered with gestures of quiet regret, such as the way she clutches her weathered notebook of deaths as if it were both a burden and her only legacy. Iris's arc is bittersweet. While she finally shares the truth with her descendants and empowers Stefani, she never truly frees herself from the guilt. Her role demonstrates that knowledge without action becomes a prison, and she changes only in that she passes responsibility to the next generation. The cousins, Eric, Bobby, and Julia Campbell, each serve as mirrors for different human responses to doom. Eric, skeptical and stubborn, begins by dismissing the supernatural explanation, craving rational control. His downfall comes when his denial blinds him to warnings, and his death scene underscores his refusal to accept the rules. Bobby represents optimism, constantly trying to lighten the mood or find a workaround, but his growth is short-lived as he realizes that charm and positivity cannot stop the inevitable. Julia, the most emotionally vulnerable of the three, is defined by fear, yet she shows brief courage when she comforts Charlie during a crisis. These side characters may not evolve as dramatically as Stefani or Iris, but their arcs highlight the many ways people wrestle with inevitability, denial, humor, or despair. The antagonist, as always in the Final Destination franchise, is death itself. It has no physical form, but in this installment it is given a sharper thematic identity. Death represents the idea of correction, not random cruelty. Its role is to erase bloodlines that should never have existed. The characters perceive it differently. Some see it as punishment, others as destiny, and Stefani as an adversary she might outthink. By framing death this way, the narrative makes it more than a force of horror. It becomes the embodiment of inevitability, the true obstacle every character must confront. Small moments throughout the film add depth to the character development. A gesture, like Stefani stepping protectively in front of Charlie during a chaotic accident, reveals her growing courage. An offhand comment from Iris about hearing the cries of those she saved shows the weight she has carried. Even the cousins' banter in early scenes adds contrast to their later fear, making their fates more poignant. These beats give dimension to the characters and remind viewers that the film is not only about spectacular deaths but also about human choices and relationships. By the end of Final Destination Bloodlines, the characters have been reshaped by terror. Stefani grows from doubt to determination, Charlie matures through trauma, and Iris finds partial release from her lifelong burden. The cousins reflect the futility of different coping strategies, showing that survival is as much about character as it is about chance. While death remains undefeated, the characters' arcs bring emotional resonance, ensuring that audiences do not only remember how they died but also who they were when they lived. The performances in Final Destination Bloodlines are central to why the movie resonates beyond its elaborate set pieces. Horror franchises often rely heavily on spectacle, but in this installment the cast adds a layer of sincerity that makes the tension more effective. Each actor brings a distinct energy to their role, and while some performances soar, a few moments feel slightly uneven against the otherwise cohesive ensemble. Caitlin Santawana, playing Stefani Reyes, anchors the film with a grounded and emotionally layered performance. She begins the story as an uncertain young woman weighed down by strange dreams, and Santawana uses subtle vocal hesitations and body language to capture her early uncertainty. As the film progresses, she shifts seamlessly into determination, her voice carrying more weight and her posture becoming firmer, reflecting her growth as Stefani embraces her role as protector. Her strongest moment comes in a scene where she confronts her family with Iris's notebook, her delivery filled with urgency and fear but never slipping into melodrama. The sincerity of her performance gives the audience someone to root for in a story where fate feels unbeatable. Teo Briones as Charlie Reyes brings charm and youthful rebellion that contrasts well with Santawana's seriousness. His early scenes show him shrugging off danger with a mix of humor and dismissiveness, and Briones uses timing to make these lines believable rather than dismissive clichés. What makes his performance stand out is the way his tone shifts after witnessing a horrific death. His voice cracks slightly, his confidence drains, and his physical presence shrinks, showing a boy forced into maturity by trauma. His chemistry with Santawana creates the film's emotional center, particularly in a quiet scene where Charlie admits he should have trusted her, a moment that feels honest because of the vulnerability Briones brings. Gabrielle Rose as the older Iris Campbell delivers one of the film's most haunting performances. Rose captures the weariness of a woman burdened by decades of guilt, speaking with a deliberate pace that conveys both wisdom and regret. Her scenes are filled with small gestures, clutching her notebook close to her chest, pausing before answering questions, that reveal how haunted she is. The emotional weight of her monologues, especially when she explains the bloodline theory, comes from her calm but pained delivery. Rose's performance provides the film with gravitas, grounding the supernatural threat in human emotion. Breck Basinger as the young Iris in flashbacks adds vitality to the character's history. While her role is smaller, she conveys the panic and determination of a young woman seeing visions for the first time. The fear in her eyes and the frantic edge in her voice during the Skyview premonition sequence sells the idea that this single choice altered the lives of generations. Though brief, her performance lingers because it makes the older Iris's guilt feel earned and believable. Richard Harmon as Eric Campbell brings a stubborn, skeptical energy to the ensemble. Harmon has a sharpness in his delivery, often speaking with clipped sarcasm, which makes his denial of the supernatural believable. His performance shines in moments of confrontation, where his frustration with the family's acceptance of Iris's theory boils over. However, in his final scenes his resistance feels a touch repetitive, as if the script gave him fewer layers to play with. Still, Harmon makes Eric's skepticism feel authentic and adds tension to group dynamics. Owen Patrick Joyner as Bobby Campbell infuses his role with humor and charm. His upbeat presence gives the audience brief relief from the tension, and his comic timing makes his optimism believable rather than forced. A standout moment comes when he nervously jokes during a dangerous setup, his laughter thinly veiling fear. Joyner manages to balance levity with realism, and when his inevitable fate arrives, it lands harder because his cheerful energy has made him likable. Anna Lohr as Julia Campbell plays the most vulnerable of the cousins. Her performance is built around small expressions, averted eyes, trembling hands, that communicate fear without many lines. While she has fewer standout moments compared to others, her quiet presence contributes to the group's dynamic. In one touching scene, she comforts Charlie after a traumatic accident, and her calm, tender tone creates a brief but memorable human moment amid chaos. Rhea Kihlstedt, Alex Zahara, and April Telek as the parental figures deliver reliable supporting performances. Kihlstedt, in particular, gives Darlene a maternal authority that balances concern with disbelief, while Zahara and Telek add texture without overshadowing the younger cast. Their performances feel natural, grounding the supernatural story in recognizable family dynamics. The returning Tony Todd as William Bloodworth is another highlight. Though his screen time is limited, his voice alone commands attention. Todd's deep, deliberate delivery turns even simple lines into ominous declarations. His physical stillness contrasts with the chaos around him, and his presence connects this film to the broader franchise mythology. Each scene he appears in feels elevated simply by the weight of his performance. If there is any unevenness, it comes from moments where the intensity of certain performances does not fully align. At times Harmon's sarcasm feels slightly at odds with the more grounded fear of Santa Juana and Briones, and Lore's quieter portrayal occasionally fades into the background. However, these are minor issues in an ensemble that overall delivers authenticity. What makes the acting in Final Destination Bloodlines memorable is how the performers translate fear into different shades of humanity. Santa Juana's resilience, Briones' vulnerability, Rose's gravitas, and Todd's ominous authority all combine to create a layered cast. Even smaller moments, like a nervous laugh or a trembling hand, add depth that keeps the audience invested. By the end, it is not only the deaths that linger in memory but also the faces and voices of the characters who fought against fate. The direction of Final Destination Bloodlines is one of the most critical elements in shaping how the film feels and how the audience experiences its relentless tension. A horror movie in this franchise cannot simply rely on shocking deaths or unexpected twists. It must also maintain a steady atmosphere of dread and inevitability, and that is where the director's hand becomes most visible. The vision here is centered on keeping the audience aware that death itself is the true villain while ensuring that each scene serves both suspense and character beats. From the opening sequence to the finale, the film demonstrates how a careful blend of pacing, framing, and stylistic choices can elevate what could have been a straightforward horror into something that lingers in the mind long after the credits roll. The opening moments are a clear statement of intent. Rather than diving immediately into chaos, the director builds a slow, creeping sense of unease with tracking shots, ordinary conversations, and an almost mundane setup that hides the terror waiting to unfold. This choice reflects an understanding that horror works best when contrast is at play. By starting grounded in normalcy, the eventual shift into disaster becomes more unsettling. The pacing throughout the first act reflects this balance, layering moments of calm with small visual cues, an object slightly out of place, a close-up on a harmless detail, that foreshadow the accidents to come. This use of subtlety demonstrates a deliberate decision to keep viewers constantly scanning the frame for signs of danger, heightening engagement without needing cheap jump scares. Another important directorial choice is the reliance on dynamic camera movement during the death sequences. Instead of keeping the camera static, the director uses a mix of sweeping angles and close-up details that mimic the unpredictable nature of fate. A sudden tilt here or a frantic pan there helps disorient the viewer, placing them in the shoes of the characters who never know when or how the next tragedy will strike. These sequences also reveal a strong grasp of rhythm. Each potential death is staged almost like a short film within the movie, building tension in layers. A kettle starts boiling, a loose wire sparks, a character glances away for just a moment, and the audience is left holding its breath. By stretching time and then snapping it suddenly with a fatal blow, the direction maximizes impact. The performances of the cast are deeply influenced by the director's guidance, and this is especially visible in the ensemble scenes. Rather than letting actors fall into clichés, the direction emphasizes natural reactions, overlapping dialogue, and physical unease. This creates a feeling of authenticity even in extreme situations. The fear is not always loud or exaggerated, sometimes it is shown in small hesitations, nervous glances, or silence. The director's insistence on grounding these moments helps keep the supernatural concept believable. Even when death is presented as an unstoppable force, the characters behave in ways that feel true to life, which makes their fates hit harder. Stylistically, the film leans into atmospheric close-ups and recurring visual motifs. A cracked mirror, a flickering light, or a reflection caught at the corner of the frame are used not just as horror tropes but as reminders that danger is always present. The director favors these lingering images over excessive gore, which speaks to a preference for psychological unease rather than shock value. This restraint shows confidence in storytelling. It allows the audience's imagination to work alongside what is shown on screen, often making the unseen more terrifying than the explicit. The pacing in the second act shows both the strengths and risks of the director's approach. By focusing on slow-burn suspense rather than constant action, some viewers may feel moments dragging, especially in dialogue-heavy stretches. Yet this pacing allows for emotional peaks when the chaos does erupt. The contrast between quiet tension and explosive violence is carefully orchestrated, and this back-and-forth rhythm ensures the film never feels predictable. Each act builds naturally to the next, with the finale serving as a culmination of all earlier techniques. The finale is where the director's vision comes full circle. Here, the staging is tighter, the camera angles more claustrophobic, and the editing faster, creating an overwhelming sense of inevitability. The final sequence does not simply aim for shock but instead emphasizes the inescapable nature of fate, leaving audiences with both fear and reflection. The director's confidence in this thematic consistency is what gives the film its identity, marking it as more than just another installment in the franchise. In the end, the direction of Final Destination Bloodlines succeeds because it balances spectacle with atmosphere. It understands that the franchise's appeal lies not only in inventive deaths but also in the dread that comes from anticipating them. Every stylistic choice, from how scenes are staged to how characters are guided, reflects a vision that respects the legacy of the series while carving its own path. The director's ability to maintain control over tone, pacing, and emotional rhythm ensures that the film feels cohesive, suspenseful, and memorable. Even in its weaker moments, the direction never loses sight of the story's core idea, that no one can escape fate. Cinematography is one of the most important elements that shapes how Final Destination Bloodlines is experienced. The franchise has always leaned heavily on visual storytelling to communicate the presence of fate and danger, and this installment uses its camera work, framing, lighting, and color design to reinforce the constant shadow of death while keeping the story grounded in human emotion. The film's cinematography is not simply decorative, it is used as a narrative device, guiding the viewer's eyes to critical details, amplifying tension in everyday objects, and embedding visual motifs that echo throughout the film. The way the camera sees this story adds weight and permanence to the experience, ensuring that certain images linger long after the movie is over. From the very beginning, the film establishes its visual language. The opening sequence favors wide framing, giving the audience a full view of seemingly ordinary settings filled with hidden danger. A wide shot of a highway or a crowded cafe becomes a field of possibilities, where the smallest object could transform into the cause of catastrophe. This choice reinforces one of the film's key themes: danger hides in plain sight. The camera's perspective makes viewers constantly scan the background, turning them into active participants in the suspense. At the same time, when the film transitions to moments of intimacy between characters, the cinematography narrows into tighter shots. This contrast allows the audience to feel the character's vulnerability up close, reminding us that even personal, emotional moments cannot escape the looming presence of fate. Lighting plays an equally vital role in shaping the mood. Early scenes often use naturalistic lighting to lull the audience into a sense of realism. Sunlight filters softly through windows, workplace environments look functional and bright, and family interactions feel warmly lit. Yet within this normality, small visual disruptions begin to appear. A shadow lingers slightly longer than expected, or a reflection flickers in a way that unsettles. As the narrative intensifies, the lighting shifts into harsher contrasts. Scenes that take place at night or in confined interiors use sharp beams, silhouettes, and sudden bursts of brightness to emphasize the violence of death's interventions. This progression in lighting design mirrors the characters' growing awareness of their fate and reflects the narrative's movement from denial to confrontation. The color palette is carefully chosen to reflect both mood and theme. Neutral tones dominate the first act, creating a canvas of ordinary life that makes the later bursts of saturated color more striking. Blood reds, deep shadows, and sickly yellows emerge during key death sequences, signaling danger and heightening emotional peaks. The cinematography uses color not only for atmosphere but also as symbolic shorthand. Red is not just a signal of violence but a reminder of inevitability. Cool blues often frame characters in moments of reflection or despair, giving visual form to their internal struggles. By weaving these choices consistently throughout the film, the cinematography builds an emotional rhythm that complements the plot. Camera movement is another area where the cinematography demonstrates its power. The death sequences are staged like elaborate domino effects, and the camera often mirrors this energy with flowing tracking shots that follow a chain of objects, from a dripping faucet to a sparking wire to a character's unaware glance. This type of kinetic movement enhances the tension, allowing the viewer to anticipate the disaster before it strikes. In contrast, moments of shock are often delivered with abrupt cuts or sudden close-ups that snap the viewer's attention to the fatal detail. The push and pull between fluid movement and jarring stillness keeps the audience in a constant state of alertness, never knowing which moment of quiet will turn deadly. Certain standout shots deserve mention for how effectively they crystallize the film's themes. One sequence features a character framed through a fractured mirror, the shards reflecting their face from multiple angles. The image serves both as a foreshadowing of their fragmented fate and as a symbolic representation of how death fractures lives without warning. Another moment places the camera beneath a glass floor as a character unknowingly walks above, the perspective making them appear fragile and exposed, heightening our sense of unease. These shots are not just stylish flourishes, they embed meaning into the visual design, turning simple imagery into lasting memory. The cinematography also uses space strategically to amplify suspense. Wide framing in crowded locations creates a sense of scale, showing how small and powerless the characters are within a larger environment controlled by unseen forces. Conversely, tight framing in confined spaces emphasizes claustrophobia and inevitability, trapping characters within the frame just as they are trapped within fate. This spatial control ensures that each scene communicates not only what is happening but also how the characters feel within their circumstances. By the time the film reaches its finale, the cinematography shifts into its most intense form. Lighting becomes stark and unforgiving, the color palette bleeds into darker tones, and the camera moves with a frenetic energy that mirrors the character's desperation. The climax is visually overwhelming, but in a deliberate way that reflects the chaos of fate's final strike. When the dust settles, the camera lingers on small, haunting details, a still object, an empty space, reminding the audience that death's presence continues beyond what we see. Ultimately, the cinematography in Final Destination Bloodlines succeeds because it is not passive. It actively shapes the story, directing our attention, playing with our expectations, and embedding visual motifs that reinforce the themes of inevitability and vulnerability. Every choice, from framing to lighting, from color palette to camera movement, is designed to make the audience feel the weight of unseen forces. The result is a visual experience that does more than decorate the narrative. It deepens it, ensuring that the imagery of the film is just as unforgettable as its story. Editing and pacing in Final Destination Bloodlines are fundamental to how the film generates its tension and sustains audience engagement. Unlike some horror films that lean entirely on visual shocks or loud sound design, this installment relies heavily on the rhythm of its cuts and transitions to make even ordinary moments feel charged with dread. Every pause, every crosscut, and every delayed reaction contributes to a pattern where suspense is stretched until it becomes almost unbearable, before snapping into moments of sudden catastrophe. The way time is manipulated through editing shapes not only the narrative flow but also the emotional state of the viewer, who is constantly kept guessing about when and how the next event will occur. From the opening sequence, the film sets the tone with editing that blends slow build-ups with sudden shifts. The introduction avoids rushing into chaos, instead favoring longer takes and subtle transitions that establish a sense of normalcy. This restraint allows the first major disaster to hit with maximum impact, as the editing suddenly shifts into rapid-fire cutting that disorients both characters and audience. The contrast between calm, measured pacing and frantic bursts of chaos becomes a defining rhythm throughout the film, reinforcing the unpredictability of death. One of the strongest aspects of the editing is how it uses foreshadowing. Shots of harmless objects, a fan blade, a glass of water, a loose nail, are intercut into everyday scenes, creating a silent countdown in the audience's mind. These inserts are often quick, almost subconscious, but they plant seeds of unease that grow as scenes progress. By returning to these details through cross-cutting, the editing manipulates time, stretching moments of anticipation to prolong suspense. The audience finds themselves on edge not because of what has happened but because of what might happen, a tension crafted almost entirely through rhythm and placement. Montages also play a role in controlling momentum. When characters research the history of previous survivors or attempt to piece together patterns of death, the film uses quick montages of documents, photographs, and flashback glimpses. These sequences are cut in a way that accelerates narrative information without bogging the pacing down in exposition. The rhythm here is sharp and purposeful, contrasting with the slower, tension-heavy sequences that dominate the death scenes. The alternation between these editing styles keeps the overall pacing dynamic, preventing the film from feeling monotonous. Flashbacks are used sparingly but effectively. Instead of long, drawn-out sequences, the film opts for brief, fragmented flashes of earlier events or memories that bleed into the present. These flashes often blur the line between past and current action, creating a disorienting effect that reflects the character's paranoia. The editing makes use of overlapping sound and quick visual fragments to create an atmosphere of inevitability, as if the characters cannot escape either their past or their fate. This technique strengthens the emotional resonance of the film without derailing its forward momentum. Silence is another tool that the editing embraces. Rather than filling every moment with music or jump cuts, certain sequences slow down dramatically, allowing long pauses and minimal cutting to create an unbearable sense of anticipation. In one particularly effective moment, a character moves through a quiet apartment, and the editing resists the urge to cut frequently. Instead, the camera lingers on stillness, forcing the audience to wait, to listen, and to anticipate danger that does not arrive until much later. This trust and restraint makes the eventual payoff far more impactful. That said, the editing is not flawless. In some stretches of the second act, the pacing risks slowing too much, especially in dialogue-driven scenes where the rhythm becomes flat. Longer takes can be powerful for tension, but here they occasionally tip into sluggishness, making certain conversations drag. A tighter cut or more frequent intercutting with external threats might have helped sustain suspense more consistently. Similarly, there are moments where the rapid-fire editing in action sequences feels slightly overdone, with so many cuts packed into a few seconds that clarity is sacrificed for intensity. While the disorientation is intentional, it sometimes blurs the geography of the scene, leaving viewers momentarily confused rather than purely terrified. Despite these minor flaws, the overall rhythm across the three acts demonstrates a clear structure. The first act builds slowly, the second alternates between research-driven montages and escalating death scenes, and the third explodes into a fast, relentless pace where cuts grow shorter and transitions harsher. The progression mirrors the character's journey, from confusion to realization to desperate confrontation. This alignment between editing rhythm and narrative arc shows a deliberate design, making the film feel cohesive and purposeful in its pacing. Some of the standout editorial choices include cross-cutting between multiple potential accidents, forcing the audience to guess which setup will deliver the fatal blow. In one scene, the film cuts between three different characters, each surrounded by dangerous objects, creating simultaneous suspense threads. The editing delays the payoff until the last possible moment, holding the viewer in a state of uncertainty that mirrors the randomness of fate. These moments highlight how editing can amplify both emotion and theme, making danger feel everywhere at once. In conclusion, the editing and pacing of Final Destination Bloodlines are integral to its identity as a suspense-driven horror film. Through careful contrasts between long, patient shots and frantic bursts of cutting, the film keeps audiences engaged in a constant cycle of anticipation and shock. The use of foreshadowing inserts, restrained silences, dynamic montages, and cross-cutting all contribute to a rhythm that mirrors the unpredictability of fate itself. While a few sections might benefit from tighter cuts or more controlled rapid editing, the overall structure demonstrates a confident hand. The result is a film whose tension is not only written into the story but also embedded in the way time is shaped by its editing. The soundtrack and score of Final Destination Bloodlines operate as an invisible hand guiding the audience through waves of suspense, dread, and emotional release. In a franchise where death itself is the antagonist, music becomes one of the most important tools for shaping atmosphere and cueing the audience on when to lean forward or when to momentarily relax. This installment understands that sound is not merely background decoration but an active character that interacts with the visuals, magnifying tension and underscoring the inevitability of fate. Whether through recurring motifs, bursts of licensed tracks, or the intentional use of silence, the film's soundscape elevates many sequences beyond what the images alone could achieve. From the very beginning, the score makes its presence felt. The opening credits unfold under a haunting motif, built on low strings and subtle electronic pulses that gradually layer in volume. This musical choice signals to the audience that something sinister lurks beneath the surface of everyday life. The motif reappears throughout the film, often in quieter moments, functioning almost like death's signature theme. Its recurrence builds a subconscious association so that whenever the motif emerges, viewers know danger is imminent. This recurring musical identity ties the film together, giving shape to an otherwise unpredictable narrative. One of the score's strongest qualities is its ability to manipulate pacing and audience expectation. In scenes where potential accidents loom, the music frequently builds in incremental steps, starting with soft tones and adding layers of percussion, distorted strings, or synthetic rumbling. This slow escalation keeps the audience on edge, waiting for the explosion of chaos. Sometimes, the music suddenly cuts off just before the moment of impact, leaving silence to heighten the shock of the final death blow. The alternating rhythm between swelling intensity and abrupt stillness reflects the unpredictability of fate and enhances the suspense structure of the film. Licensed music is used sparingly but effectively. Rather than overwhelming the score, these tracks are inserted into moments of normalcy, road trips, group hangouts, or casual conversations. Their upbeat or familiar tones create contrast with the grim events that follow, making the transition into horror more jarring. In one memorable sequence, A cheerful pop song plays on a car radio just moments before the inevitable disaster strikes. The collision between the innocence of the song and the brutality of the accident underlines the randomness of fate, reminding the audience that death does not wait for the right mood or soundtrack. These juxtapositions elevate the horror by contrasting the ordinary with the catastrophic. Silence is another tool the film uses masterfully. In certain scenes, especially during build-ups to major deaths, the score withdraws completely, leaving only diegetic sounds like creaking floors, dripping water, or the hum of an appliance. This absence of music forces viewers to lean into the natural sounds of the environment, amplifying paranoia as they scan for potential threats. When silence finally breaks with a sharp musical sting or sudden burst of score, the impact is far greater than if the music had been constant. Silence here is not emptiness but a calculated choice that manipulates the emotional state of the audience. The emotional beats of the film also rely heavily on music. In moments when characters grieve, reflect, or attempt to understand their situation, the score softens into somber piano notes or muted string arrangements. These cues give weight to the human side of the story, reminding viewers that beneath the spectacle of elaborate deaths, these are still characters experiencing loss and fear. Without these quieter musical passages, the film might risk becoming a mechanical sequence of carnage. Instead, the soundtrack humanizes the experience, creating emotional peaks that balance the horror. There are moments, however, where the score threatens to overplay its hand. In certain death sequences, the layering of instruments and heavy percussion grows so intense that it nearly distracts from the visual suspense. The strength of Final Destination's formula lies in the unpredictability of its setups, and sometimes the music telegraphs danger too aggressively, reducing the surprise factor. These instances are rare but noticeable, and a more restrained approach might have allowed tension to breathe more naturally. On the other hand, the score reaches brilliance in moments when it perfectly complements the visual design. One standout example is a sequence involving a character trapped in a confined space. The score here uses a repetitive, almost heartbeat-like rhythm that mirrors the character's rising panic. As the danger escalates, the rhythm becomes distorted, stretching and compressing in unnatural ways, creating a sonic representation of fear. When the fatal blow finally arrives, the score cuts out entirely, leaving the moment to land in chilling silence. This interplay between sound and absence of sound is what makes the sequence unforgettable. The finale also deserves mention for its musical construction. As the story races toward its climax, the score grows increasingly chaotic, layering motifs introduced earlier in the film. Strings clash against electronic tones, percussion pounds relentlessly, and the sound design merges with the score until it feels like the environment itself is collapsing in rhythm with the music. This overwhelming blend mirrors the chaos of fate's final strike, immersing the audience fully in the spectacle. The closing notes, however, return to the quiet motif from the beginning, creating a cyclical effect that reminds viewers the cycle of death never truly ends. In the end, the soundtrack and score of Final Destination Bloodlines succeed in making sound a central storytelling device. Through haunting motifs, strategic use of licensed tracks, deliberate silences, and emotionally resonant cues, the music shapes the audience's emotional journey as much as the visuals do. While there are moments where the score edges toward excess, its overall design is both purposeful and memorable. It ensures that the film does not simply unfold as a sequence of shocking images, but as a carefully orchestrated experience where sound is as vital as sight. Final Destination Bloodlines, like the earlier entries in the franchise, is not just about elaborate accidents and shocking deaths. Beneath its surface-level thrills, the film wrestles with deeper themes that give weight to its narrative and make it resonate beyond the spectacle. At its core, the story grapples with inevitability, the fragility of life, and the human struggle against forces beyond control. Layered within this foundation are explorations of fear, survival, identity, and the interconnectedness of lives. These themes run through the characters' journeys, the staging of death sequences, and even the visual motifs that repeat throughout the film. While not every idea lands with equal clarity, the attempt to balance entertainment with philosophical reflection is evident in how the movie communicates meaning through both action and image. The most dominant theme is inevitability. Death is not presented as a villain with human motives, but as a universal force that cannot be bargained with or defeated. This idea shapes every moment of suspense in the film. Characters may run, hide, or attempt to cheat their fates, but the editing and camera work continually remind the audience that escape is temporary at best. This theme is communicated most strongly through the recurring musical motif, the visual foreshadowing of dangerous objects, and the constant sense that any setting could become a death trap. By portraying inevitability not as a punishment but as a law of existence, the film invites viewers to confront their own vulnerability and the limits of human control. Closely tied to inevitability is the theme of fear and how individuals respond to it. Each character represents a different way of dealing with mortality. Some become paranoid, scrutinizing every detail of their environment. Others grow reckless, embracing danger as a way to defy fate. A few turn to denial, pretending that nothing is wrong. The film communicates these internal states less through dialogue and more through action and visual cues. A character who compulsively checks doors and windows, another who nervously scans a mirror, or one who forces laughter in the middle of tension, these gestures express the theme of fear without words. By presenting fear as both a motivator and a prison, the movie captures the psychological toll of living under constant threat. Another important theme is identity and the way crisis reveals who people truly are. In normal life, the characters have roles: friend, sibling, co-worker, but when death starts closing in, those identities are tested. Do they prioritize themselves, or do they try to protect others? Do they cling to rational explanations, or do they embrace superstition and instinct? The film uses moments of chaos to strip away surface identities and reveal raw survival instincts. For example, a character who appeared selfish in early scenes surprises others with a moment of sacrifice, while another who seemed dependable cracks under pressure. These shifts explore the theme that identity is fluid, shaped by the challenges individuals face and the choices they make when tested. The theme of interconnectedness also threads through the narrative. Final Destination Bloodlines emphasizes how small actions and relationships ripple outward, linking lives in ways characters may not realize. The chain reaction deaths mirror this idea visually, as one tiny detail leads to catastrophic consequences. Beyond the mechanics of accidents, the relationships between characters highlight how one person's choice or sacrifice affects the fate of others. This theme is underscored by the editing, which often cuts between parallel moments to suggest unseen links between events. In a broader sense, the film asks viewers to consider how fragile human connections are and how much of life is shaped by invisible ties. Redemption also plays a subtle role, though it is not always resolved clearly. Some characters seek to redeem past mistakes, whether through bravery, honesty, or selflessness. The film communicates this theme through key actions rather than dialogue. A character's decision to warn someone else despite their own risk, or another's attempt to save someone they had wronged earlier, reveals redemption as an underlying thread. However, because the franchise insists that no one can truly escape fate, these attempts often end tragically, raising questions about whether redemption matters if the outcome cannot change. This tension between effort and inevitability makes the theme more complex and thought-provoking. Visually, the film uses recurring symbols to reinforce its themes. Mirrors reflect fractured identities and the inevitability of fate, shadows hint at unseen forces, and recurring objects like broken glass or dripping water remind viewers of fragility. These images communicate ideas without needing explicit explanation. For example, a lingering shot of a flickering light bulb may represent not just danger but the fragile line between life and death. By embedding themes in the environment, the film ensures that meaning is carried by image as much as by dialogue. At times, the film sends mixed signals about its themes, which makes interpretation both interesting and frustrating. For example, while inevitability is clearly central, the repeated attempts at redemption and sacrifice suggest that personal choice still holds meaning, even if it cannot change the end result. This ambiguity can be read as a weakness, but it can also be seen as intentional. Life, after all, is filled with contradictions. The film seems to acknowledge that human beings crave meaning in the face of randomness, even if ultimate control is impossible. In conclusion, Final Destination Bloodlines is more than a chain of inventive death sequences. Beneath its surface, it wrestles with themes of inevitability, fear, identity, interconnectedness, and redemption. It communicates these ideas not only through dialogue but also through action, visual motifs, and sound design. While the film occasionally leaves thematic questions unresolved, that very ambiguity mirrors the uncertainty of life and the mysteries of fate. For a horror thriller built on spectacle, its ability to provoke reflection about universal human experiences is what makes it linger long after the credits roll. Final Destination Bloodlines builds its reputation not just on suspenseful storytelling but also on its visual presentation, where visual effects and practical work come together to create a convincing world of danger. Since this franchise has always relied on shocking, elaborate accidents, the quality of its visual execution is essential. A single effect that looks artificial or poorly integrated can pull the audience out of the tension, while seamless effects heighten the immersion and make every sequence feel believable. The balance between digital VFX and practical effects is what determines whether the film succeeds in keeping its audience fully engaged. From the very start, the film sets a tone that leans heavily on visual design. The opening disaster sequence is always the centerpiece of a Final Destination movie, and in Bloodlines, it relies on a mix of practical stunts and digital augmentation. Vehicles colliding, glass shattering, and bodies hurled through the air are achieved with stunt work, wire rigs, and physical debris, while the large-scale explosions and environmental destruction lean on CGI. In moments where both approaches blend smoothly, the result is immersive and terrifying. For example, when a car flips across a crowded road, the practical stunt driving anchors the scene in reality while digital fire and debris expand the scale. This hybrid approach is where the film shines, because the practical groundwork keeps the digital additions from feeling weightless. However, not every use of CGI is flawless. There are moments when the weight of objects, particularly falling debris or collapsing structures, appears slightly off. Audiences can sense when something has been simulated rather than physically performed, and in a film where tension depends on realism, even small flaws can break the spell. For instance, a sequence involving a collapsing construction scaffold has moments of brilliance. Dust clouds and sparks look practical, but when a massive steel beam swings unnaturally smoothly, the effect distracts from the terror it is meant to provoke. These moments remind viewers of the boundary between reality and simulation, which undercuts the suspense. The film is strongest when it uses CGI in subtle ways, rather than as the centerpiece. A flickering reflection in a mirror, the ominous movement of water droplets along a pipe, or the faint distortion of glass before it shatters are examples where digital work enhances atmosphere without drawing attention to itself. These details build dread by reminding the audience that danger lurks in every object, and because they are not flashy, they integrate smoothly with the practical world. The franchise has always thrived on the idea that death can come from the smallest details, and Bloodlines continues that tradition through its restrained use of digital enhancement. Another strength is how the effects support storytelling rather than functioning as visual spectacle alone. The chain reactions that define each death sequence are carefully crafted to show cause and effect, and visual effects help link these moments together. When a spark ignites a spill that leads to a fire, which then sets off an explosion, the digital additions clarify the sequence of events so the audience can follow the inevitability of fate. This precision makes the elaborate deaths feel less like random chaos and more like carefully designed traps, reinforcing the film's central theme of inevitability. Without this clarity, the sequences could easily become overwhelming or confusing, but the effects ensure that every moment feels intentional. In terms of practical effects, Bloodlines deserves credit for relying on real stunts wherever possible. Scenes involving broken glass, collapsing furniture, or small-scale fire gags are performed with physical rigs, giving them a tactile quality that digital work cannot replicate. For example, when a character is nearly impaled by a falling piece of wood, the moment is staged practically with a timed release mechanism, allowing the camera to capture the raw speed and danger of the object. Digital effects are then layered on top to polish the impact and enhance debris, but because the core action is real, the audience feels the weight of the danger. This approach echoes the earlier films in the franchise, which often blended practical gore effects with digital finishing to maintain believability. There are also sequences where heavy compositing and digital environments are used, particularly in scenes where multiple hazards occur simultaneously. For instance, a scene involving a crowded public space with multiple chain reactions could not have been executed safely without heavy VFX. Here, digital crowds, collapsing structures, and environmental destruction dominate the screen. While technically impressive, these moments sometimes risk overwhelming the viewer with too much activity, creating a spectacle that feels more like a visual showcase than a suspenseful moment. The best sequences are the ones that keep focus on a single chain of cause and effect, allowing the audience to track events without losing immersion. Motion capture is less prominent in Bloodlines, but there are moments where it seems to have been used for body movement in extreme death shots, such as when a character is flung into unnatural positions after a violent impact. While the detail in these shots is convincing, they occasionally verge on exaggeration, where human anatomy bends in ways that feel digital. For a franchise rooted in grounded terror, these instances can feel jarring. Still, they are relatively rare and do not dominate the overall visual approach. Ultimately, Final Destination Bloodlines succeeds more often than it falters in its use of visual effects and CGI. Its best moments come when digital and practical work are seamlessly combined, creating sequences that feel both spectacular and grounded. The subtler uses of effects are particularly effective, enhancing tension without drawing attention to the craft itself. When CGI becomes too dominant or slightly unnatural, the illusion breaks and the suspense weakens, but these moments are outweighed by the technical brilliance of the stronger set pieces. For fans of the series, the film delivers the elaborate and inventive visual sequences expected, while also demonstrating how effects can be more than spectacle. They can be integral to storytelling and thematic depth. Set design and location choices are essential in shaping the atmosphere of Final Destination Bloodlines because the world these characters inhabit has to feel real, lived in, and full of unnoticed dangers. The franchise has always thrived on its ability to take ordinary environments and make them terrifying by revealing how everyday spaces can turn into deadly traps. In Bloodlines, the production design team works carefully to create sets and select locations that not only ground the film in authenticity but also feed directly into the suspense and inevitability that define the series. The film opens with a location that feels both familiar and ominous. Instead of creating a purely fantastical setting, the story situates its characters in a real-world environment that viewers recognize, like a bustling cityscape or suburban hub. This choice immediately places the audience in a comfort zone before the danger escalates. The production design emphasizes lived-in details, from scattered personal belongings in apartments to the way public spaces are layered with signs, fixtures, and background noise. By building authenticity into every frame, the film ensures that when accidents occur, the terror feels like it could happen anywhere. Cramped apartments and shared living spaces are particularly important to the story. The design of these interiors shows personality through small touches, a cluttered kitchen counter, a half-read book on a nightstand, or family photos tucked away in corners. These elements are not just decoration but storytelling tools, providing insight into who the characters are and what they care about. At the same time, these rooms are designed with danger in mind. Electrical cords cross floors, shelves are loaded with precarious objects, and windows sit slightly loose in their frames. Every detail doubles as both character background and potential hazard, reflecting the franchise's signature style of turning normal spaces into ticking time bombs. Public locations add another layer of authenticity. A workplace environment, for example, is designed to feel both functional and unsettling. Office desks cluttered with equipment, industrial hallways lined with pipes, or construction sites buzzing with heavy machinery all have practical uses but also serve as visual foreshadowing. The production design ensures that nothing feels placed randomly. Every prop, from a dangling light fixture to a misplaced tool, could later become part of a fatal chain reaction. This layering of purpose gives the film an undercurrent of unease, because the viewer begins scanning every object in the frame as a potential threat. Outdoor locations are equally important in shaping mood. The use of wide-open spaces contrasts with the tight, enclosed interiors, creating shifts in tone that keep the audience unsettled. A sweeping landscape may at first suggest freedom or safety, but the production design and staging quickly remind viewers that danger is never far away. For instance, a serene park might contain fragile branches, unstable benches, or even a hidden hazard beneath the surface. The design team uses these juxtapositions to amplify tension, showing that even the most peaceful settings can hide lethal possibilities. The choice between practical locations and studio builds also reveals the filmmaker's intent. Real locations provide texture and unpredictability, grounding the story in recognizable reality. A street corner with natural weathering, graffiti on walls, and authentic city noise feels immersive in a way a studio build rarely can. On the other hand, studio sets allow for total control, particularly in scenes where elaborate stunts or destructive accidents occur. Bloodlines mixes the two approaches skillfully, often starting in a real location for authenticity before transitioning into a controlled set where dangerous events can be executed safely and convincingly. The seamless blending of these approaches ensures that viewers never feel the artificiality of the environment. Props play a crucial role in the film's visual storytelling. Everyday items such as coffee makers, mirrors, or ceiling fans are carefully chosen not just for realism but for their potential as threats. The production team knows that audiences of the franchise look at objects differently, scanning for what might spark the next chain reaction. A simple glass of water placed near a laptop carries tension because of what it implies, and when the inevitable occurs, the payoff feels earned because the object has been visually established earlier in the scene. This attention to detail in prop placement transforms normal life into a minefield of possibilities. Color choices within sets also play into mood and theme. Warm, Domestic spaces often contrast with colder, sterile environments like hospitals, morgues, or workplaces. This deliberate shift in design mirrors the emotional journey of the characters, moving from spaces of comfort and familiarity to spaces of dread and inevitability. Lighting works hand in hand with design, highlighting certain textures and drawing attention to potential hazards without being overt. A flicker of fluorescent light in a hallway or a shadow cast across a cluttered table adds subtle unease that complements the physical set. Another strength of Bloodlines is how the design supports actor performance. When characters are surrounded by believable environments, their reactions feel more natural. A cramped room forces them to move with caution, a cluttered workshop makes them appear wary of their surroundings, and a chaotic street scene demands urgency. These details allow actors to physically interact with their space, grounding their performances in reality and reinforcing the idea that danger is all around them. Ultimately, the set design and location choices in Final Destination Bloodlines are more than background, they are active participants in the storytelling. Every environment is designed with dual purposes, to reveal something about character and to foreshadow the inevitability of danger. By combining real-world authenticity with carefully constructed hazards, the film creates a world where no space feels safe and every object carries potential threat. This attention to production detail elevates the suspense, making the story resonate more deeply because it feels like it could happen in the places we inhabit every day. The script of Final Destination Bloodlines balances two responsibilities: advancing the mechanics of the franchise's death-driven narrative while giving characters voices that feel distinct and believable. Dialogue in a film like this cannot afford to be merely functional. It has to carry character, theme, and emotion while also planting seeds of tension that keep the audience engaged. What makes Bloodlines notable is how it often succeeds in grounding its supernatural premise in exchanges that feel rooted in real human anxieties. At the same time, there are moments where the dialogue leans into exposition too heavily, making it clear that the script is straining to deliver information rather than letting it emerge organically. Early conversations set the tone. When Stefani returns home and begins questioning her family about the strange dreams and their connection to past events, her lines are crafted with curiosity and hesitation. She is not immediately confrontational but instead probes with subtle remarks. This approach reveals her uncertainty and fear of being dismissed, creating empathy for her position. Her younger brother Charlie is written with sharp, reactive lines that highlight both his skepticism and his desire to protect himself emotionally from the weight of family trauma. These exchanges establish character dynamics quickly without needing long explanations. The most effective dialogue in the script comes when subtext is allowed to lead. A brief exchange between Iris and Stefani, where Iris warns her that patterns always return, functions on two levels. On the surface, it refers to death cycle, but it also hints at family history repeating itself and the burden of inherited guilt. This is where the script excels, when lines resonate beyond the immediate plot, giving audiences something to reflect on even as the narrative barrels toward its next set piece. In contrast, some moments suffer from overly direct exposition. When characters explicitly explain how death's design operates or recap past franchise incidents, the dialogue risks becoming clunky. Long stretches where one character explains rules to another can feel less like natural conversation and more like a lecture for the audience's benefit. A rewrite could have trimmed these moments by letting the information emerge visually or through implication rather than through lengthy speeches. Silence is another important tool in the script. There are several points where pauses or unspoken exchanges carry more weight than dialogue. For example, a scene where Stefani stares at Iris's notebook while Charlie looks away communicates volumes about their contrasting relationships to fate and denial without either character needing to say much. These moments demonstrate the script's awareness that sometimes restraint conveys emotion more powerfully than words. The script also uses dialogue to layer in humor, a hallmark of the franchise. A tense moment broken by a nervous joke or a sarcastic remark helps release pressure before the next scare. These touches humanize the characters, making them more relatable and reminding audiences that these are young people dealing with extraordinary circumstances. The humor never dominates but instead punctuates scenes with just enough levity to keep the pacing dynamic. Conversations between secondary characters also carry significance. Julia and Bobby, for example, are given exchanges that reveal their sibling bond and individual fears. Their dialogue does not only exist to fill space but deepens their personalities, making their fates matter more when death eventually closes in. By contrast, a few minor characters are underwritten, with their lines reduced to generic fear reactions or background chatter. These instances weaken immersion because they highlight which characters are central and which are disposable. One strength of the script is how it uses repetition to build theme. Phrases about fate, inevitability, and cycles appear in different contexts, spoken by different characters. This creates a rhythm that reinforces the central question of whether destiny can be escaped. The variation in how these ideas are expressed, sometimes angrily, sometimes fearfully, sometimes resignedly, shows the range of responses to the same existential dilemma. The climax demonstrates how dialogue and silence work together. As the characters attempt to disrupt the order, their frantic exchanges are brief, clipped, and filled with urgency, reflecting the panic of the moment. But once the final death unfolds, the script allows silence to linger, leaving the audience to sit with the aftermath rather than rushing to close with more words. This careful control of rhythm elevates the emotional impact. Still, there are areas where the writing could be sharper. Certain monologues over-explain emotional beats rather than trusting the audience to understand from performance and context. A rewrite with tighter lines and more reliance on subtext would have preserved the tension while avoiding moments that feel heavy-handed. In the end, the dialogue and script of Final Destination Bloodlines succeed more often than they stumble. Character voices are largely distinct, with enough nuance to give weight to their journeys. Key lines resonate thematically, silence is used effectively, and humor offsets the tension without undercutting it. The weaknesses lie in patches of exposition that feel forced and occasional padding that slows pacing. Overall, the script provides a solid backbone for the film's blend of horror and suspense, offering both memorable lines and subtle exchanges that linger after the credits roll. Final Destination Bloodlines is firmly rooted in the horror genre, but like the best entries in the franchise, it does not simply rely on jump scares or gore to satisfy its audience. Instead, it blends horror with elements of suspense, drama, and psychological tension, creating a hybrid experience that feels familiar yet freshly energized. The film's success in genre execution depends on how well it balances audience expectations of the Final Destination brand with its willingness to expand the mythology and push into new thematic territory. For the most part, Bloodlines honors what fans come for while also adding layers that make the film feel like more than just a string of elaborate death scenes. At its core, the horror comes from inevitability. The Final Destination series has always thrived on the terror of inevitability rather than the presence of a traditional villain. In Bloodlines, that dread is amplified by the generational theme, suggesting that death is not just chasing survivors of one incident but stretching its hand across decades and family lines. This narrative expansion leans into psychological horror because it reframes the concept of fate as something inherited and unavoidable. Fans of the franchise expect gruesome accidents, but the film earns additional weight by connecting those accidents to the characters' deeper fears about family, legacy, and the lack of control over life. The film also nails the classic set pieces that define the franchise's place in horror history. Each sequence builds tension through ordinary settings, tattoo parlors, kitchens, apartments, workplaces, before spiraling into elaborate, Rube Goldberg-style accidents. These sequences deliver on genre expectations by offering both suspense and spectacle. Horror fans come to these films wanting to scan the screen, guessing what object or action will trigger catastrophe. Bloodlines honors that ritual, giving audiences the satisfaction of anticipation and payoff. In this respect, it hits the essential beats of the franchise and ensures that longtime fans are not disappointed. One area where Bloodlines distinguishes itself is in how it integrates drama into its horror framework. Many horror films rely heavily on thinly drawn characters, treating them as vehicles for scares rather than fully developed people. Bloodlines invests more effort in exploring its central family, their relationships, and their hidden motives. Stefani's return home, her connection to Iris, and the tension with her cousins ground the supernatural horror in emotional stakes. This hybridization of horror and drama ensures that when deaths occur, they feel more personal, which amplifies the impact for the audience. Rather than leaning on clichés like shallow archetypes or disposable side characters, the film attempts to give meaning to its ensemble. The film also avoids one of the genre's most common pitfalls, over-reliance on jump scares. While sudden frights are part of the DNA of horror cinema, Bloodlines is more interested in sustained tension. Long takes, slow reveals, and ominous silences build anticipation until the final, violent release. This approach aligns with what fans of the franchise expect, deaths that feel earned through build-up rather than cheap shock tactics. The result is horror that lingers rather than startles and disappears. That said, the film does not completely avoid tropes. Some character beats are familiar, such as the skeptical sibling who refuses to believe until it is too late or the fatalistic elder who carries secret knowledge of past events. These archetypes are staples of the horror genre, and while they may feel predictable, they also anchor the story in recognizable rhythms that fans expect. The film refreshes these tropes by layering them with personal motivations and subtle changes, but they remain familiar enough to remind viewers they are in a Final Destination movie. Bloodlines also experiments with narrative structure in ways that refresh the genre. By weaving in flashbacks to 1969 and blending them with present-day events, the film disrupts the linear flow typical of most horror films. This choice deepens the mythology while also adding variety to the rhythm of scares. It asks the audience to piece together connections, which makes the experience more interactive than passive. While some viewers may find this approach challenging, it is a deliberate attempt to evolve beyond formula. In terms of audience expectations, the film largely succeeds. Fans want to see inventive kills, suspenseful build-up, and a sense of inevitability, and Bloodlines delivers all of these. What risks alienating some viewers, however, is the heavier focus on themes of family and generational guilt. Some fans who prefer pure spectacle may see these narrative choices as slowing the pace or complicating the formula. On the other hand, viewers looking for more substance in their horror are likely to appreciate the ambition. Another aspect worth noting is how Bloodlines situates itself within broader horror trends. Modern horror has increasingly leaned toward elevated storytelling, where themes of trauma, legacy, and identity are woven into the scares. Bloodlines positions itself within that trend by exploring how one act of survival decades ago continues to ripple across generations. In this sense, the film is not just another installment in a long-running franchise but also a commentary on the enduring appeal of horror itself, the fear that what haunts us cannot simply be escaped but is carried forward through Bloodlines. In conclusion, Final Destination Bloodlines succeeds in its genre execution by honoring the franchise's trademarks while layering in new approaches that expand its scope. It delivers the suspense and gruesome creativity that horror fans expect, avoids cheap overuse of jump scares, and enriches its story with drama and psychological depth. While it leans on familiar tropes at times, it refreshes them enough to feel engaging rather than stale. The result is a film that not only satisfies core fans but also pushes the boundaries of what a Final Destination movie can be, making it both a continuation and a reinvention of the horror genre. Final Destination Bloodlines is, on the surface, a horror film about inevitability, chance, and elaborate accidents, but like many entries in the genre, it cannot help but reflect the world in which it was made. Horror has always doubled as a cultural mirror, and while Bloodlines never becomes an overtly political or social film, it carries subtext that speaks to contemporary anxieties. Its themes of generational burden, lack of control, and the randomness of catastrophe resonate strongly with a modern audience living in uncertain times. At its best, the film channels those fears into compelling storytelling, but at moments it also simplifies issues that could have been explored more deeply. One of the clearest forms of cultural commentary comes through the film's focus on bloodlines and inherited fate. In American culture, conversations around legacy, family trauma, and intergenerational responsibility have become increasingly prominent. From rising discussions about inherited debt and climate change to cultural debates over how past injustices ripple into the present, the idea that the past shapes the future is a pressing theme. By presenting death as correcting the disruption of survival across generations, the film mirrors the anxiety that the choices of previous generations weigh on those who come after. While it couches this idea in supernatural horror, audiences familiar with such real-world discussions can easily draw connections between the metaphor and lived reality. The portrayal of family dynamics also carries cultural weight. Stefani's return home, her struggle to understand her family's history, and her need to confront secrets that have long been buried all reflect broader cultural narratives about reconnecting with origins and unearthing uncomfortable truths. Many viewers can identify with the notion that the actions of older relatives, even those made decades ago, still cast shadows over the present. In this way, the film acts as a metaphor for cultural reckonings, where past silence eventually demands acknowledgement. The film also indirectly comments on the illusion of control, a theme particularly resonant in an era marked by pandemics, economic instability, and environmental crises. Characters try to outsmart death, to bend rules, to plan meticulously, but every attempt is undermined by the reality that they are not in control of their fate. This sense of helplessness reflects the cultural mood of living in a world where systems often feel beyond individual influence. It is no coincidence that the franchise continues to thrive during times when unpredictability dominates daily life, because it amplifies what people already feel, that danger lurks in the most ordinary places, and control is often an illusion. On the other hand, the film's handling of social diversity is more mixed. While the cast is varied in terms of background and personality, the script does not always dig deeply into cultural specificity. Characters' identities are not used to explore broader social issues, and while this keeps the story streamlined, it also sidesteps opportunities to add meaningful commentary on how different groups might experience the burden of inherited fate. Some may see this as a missed chance for richer storytelling, especially given how many horror films today use identity as an avenue for cultural critique. There are also subtle undertones about belief systems and skepticism. Iris's meticulous documentation of patterns, contrasted with the younger generation's doubt, reflects a cultural divide between tradition and modernity, faith and reason. This tension can be read as commentary on how societies today struggle with the value of ancestral wisdom versus the desire for empirical proof. The film never becomes heavy-handed here, but the interplay between belief and denial mirrors real-world debates about science, spirituality, and generational perspectives. Where the film risks oversimplification is in its approach to trauma. By tying danger to family bloodlines, the narrative sometimes suggests that trauma is an inescapable destiny rather than something that can be confronted or healed. While this works within the horror framework, it can feel reductive in a broader cultural sense. Audiences aware of contemporary conversations about breaking cycles of abuse or overcoming inherited struggles may find the fatalistic message frustrating. The suggestion that doom cannot be avoided might strike some as tone-deaf, particularly in a world that increasingly champions resilience and personal agency. At the same time, the film's fatalism has its own cultural resonance. In a society where random accidents, natural disasters, and large-scale crises dominate headlines, many viewers may find a strange honesty in the idea that not everything can be controlled or avoided. This bleak outlook may not offer comfort, but it mirrors the uncertainty of the modern world. In this sense, the film's refusal to sugarcoat fate could be seen as both unsettling and culturally relevant. Reception to this commentary will vary. Some viewers will appreciate the way Bloodlines ties its supernatural horror to larger social anxieties about legacy, helplessness, and generational burdens. Others will see it as missing an opportunity to provide more nuanced engagement with those topics, preferring instead to focus on spectacle. The balance between thematic resonance and narrative entertainment is delicate, and while the film gestures at deeper cultural issues, it does not always sustain them with consistency. In conclusion, Final Destination Bloodlines may not set out to deliver overt social critique, but it cannot avoid reflecting the fears and concerns of its time. Its focus on generational fate, family secrets, and the illusion of control mirrors anxieties that resonate with American audiences navigating a volatile world. While it risks simplifying some issues and leaving others untouched, the cultural subtext enriches the horror, grounding its elaborate accidents in a larger conversation about what we inherit, what we can change, and what remains forever outside our control. Audience engagement has always been one of the driving forces behind the success of the Final Destination franchise, and Final Destination Bloodlines is no different. The film knows that its viewers come not only for the horror set pieces, but also for the emotional reactions those set pieces provoke. It is designed to spark fear, tension, laughter, and conversation, ensuring that audiences walk away with scenes and images they cannot shake. In looking closely at this entry, it is clear that certain moments will stick in viewers' minds and fuel rewatchability as well as online discussion. One of the strongest hooks is the opening sequence, which immediately sets the tone and delivers the kind of over-the-top spectacle that the series is famous for. This scene is crafted to make viewers gasp with shock, not only because of the scale of destruction but also because of the unpredictability in how each beat plays out. Fans of the franchise know that guessing who survives the initial disaster is part of the fun, and Bloodlines uses that expectation to keep the tension high. The audience experiences both dread and exhilaration, emotions that create a lasting first impression and a shared moment for viewers in theaters or at home. Throughout the film, individual death scenes serve as emotional peaks designed for maximum engagement. The franchise has built its identity on elaborate setups where everyday objects turn deadly, and Bloodlines refines this formula with clever misdirection and layered detail. Viewers will find themselves leaning forward, scanning the screen for clues, debating with others about what object will trigger the final blow. This interactive quality is one of the franchise's unique strengths, transforming horror sequences into almost puzzle-like experiences that reward attention to detail. It is easy to imagine fans re-watching these moments frame by frame to catch foreshadowing they missed the first time around. Not every moment is about shock or fear. The film balances its terror with touches of humor and irony, often through character dialogue or the absurdity of situations. Nervous laughter is a common reaction during these scenes, especially when tension is drawn out until the inevitable happens. This balance between dread and dark humor keeps audiences engaged without overwhelming them, allowing them to release some of the fear while still staying invested. These moments of laughter, while brief, are also highly shareable in the form of quotes or reaction clips, adding to the film's cultural footprint. The emotional stakes are heightened through the generational theme, which invites viewers to connect on a deeper level. Scenes where characters confront the reality of inherited fate or uncover hidden family secrets provide opportunities for emotional engagement beyond the spectacle of death. These quieter moments may not inspire the same visceral reactions as the set pieces, but they resonate with viewers who see reflections of their own family struggles or generational questions. Tears and empathy, though rarer in a franchise known for shock value, are not out of the question in Bloodlines, especially during moments of sacrifice or revelation. Debate and fan theory culture are another layer of engagement the film cultivates. The rules of death's design, the question of whether cycles can be broken, and the meaning of certain character choices will spark conversations long after the credits roll. This franchise has always thrived on fan speculation, and Bloodlines appears to continue that tradition by leaving small ambiguities that invite interpretation. Online forums, social media threads, and casual discussions will inevitably pick apart the clues and hidden details, ensuring the movie remains alive in public conversation well beyond its release. The film also excels at creating signature moments that feel tailor-made for rewatchability. Certain sequences contain so much background detail, objects falling out of frame, minor characters acting suspiciously, or environmental hazards that nearly go unnoticed, that repeat viewings reward careful observation. This makes the film feel more layered and gives fans a reason to return, hunting for foreshadowing they might have overlooked. In the age of digital streaming, where audiences can pause and rewind endlessly, these details provide fertile ground for discovery and sharing. Additionally, some moments are destined to become cultural touchstones, the kind of clips that get turned into GIFs and shared widely. Whether it is a jaw-dropping death, a perfectly delivered line of irony, or a shocked reaction from a character, these bite-sized elements extend the film's lifespan into online spaces. The franchise has always been meme-friendly, and Bloodlines continues that trend by providing visual and emotional beats that translate easily into digital culture. The balance of spectacle, emotional depth, and interactive tension ensures that Bloodlines is not only a one-time experience but also a movie that encourages viewers to return. Its combination of gasp-worthy deaths, moments of nervous laughter, emotional family revelations, and fertile ground for fan debates makes it a strong entry in the franchise when it comes to audience engagement. Viewers will walk away not just with the adrenaline rush of horror but also with questions, theories, and conversations that continue long after the screen goes dark. In conclusion, Final Destination Bloodlines thrives on crafting scenes that demand reaction, whether that reaction is shock, laughter, sadness, or speculation. It builds on the franchise's reputation for elaborate setups while layering in themes that give emotional weight to the spectacle. The result is a film that does more than entertain in the moment. It lingers, sparking discussion, repeat viewings, and digital sharing. This lasting impact is the ultimate measure of audience engagement, proving once again why the franchise remains a cultural staple. Comparing Final Destination Bloodlines to similar films within its genre and even to earlier entries in the franchise provides a clearer picture of where this movie succeeds, where it struggles, and how it positions itself in the broader horror landscape. The Final Destination franchise has always carved a unique niche in horror by focusing not on masked killers or traditional monsters but on the inevitability of death itself. This concept alone differentiates it from slashers like Halloween or Scream, but it also puts pressure on each installment to reinvent the formula in ways that feel fresh while still staying true to the core appeal. Bloodlines leans into this challenge, and its success can be measured against both its predecessors and other contemporary horror films. The most direct comparison is, of course, with the earlier Final Destination films. The first entry set the tone with its high-concept premise and creative execution, while the second raised the stakes with more elaborate death sequences and a stronger sense of interconnected fate. Bloodlines mirrors these traditions but tries to expand them by emphasizing generational ties and family legacies, which introduces a thematic layer absent in the earlier installments. While it does not necessarily outdo the raw inventiveness of the first film, it borrows smartly from the series' history and adds new stakes that deepen the emotional engagement. In this sense, Bloodlines feels like both a homage and an evolution, reminding longtime fans why they loved the series while attempting to push it into new territory. When compared to other horror franchises, particularly slasher series like Scream or Saw, Bloodlines stands apart due to its reliance on inevitability rather than human antagonists. Saw shares some DNA in terms of elaborate, Rube Goldberg-style death traps, but the key difference is motivation. Saw's traps are designed by a human character with intent, while Final Destination frames death itself as the invisible force pulling strings. This makes the suspense less about outsmarting a villain and more about delaying the inevitable. Bloodlines continues this distinction, but it borrows some stylistic elements from Saw in how it stages complex deaths and in its willingness to push the envelope on gore and shock value. This borrowing works to heighten tension, but it sometimes risks alienating viewers who prefer the more restrained suspense of earlier franchise entries. Another strong point of comparison is with supernatural horror films like The Ring or Insidious, which similarly deal with unseen, unstoppable forces. In those films, the terror comes from the inevitability of doom and the lack of a clear antagonist to fight. Bloodlines resonates with this model by emphasizing that characters are not battling a physical being but an abstract design. Where Bloodlines differs, however, is in its use of spectacle. The Ring relies heavily on atmosphere and dread, while Final Destination favors kinetic, visceral sequences. Bloodlines continues that tradition, creating a more adrenaline-fueled experience rather than one steeped in quiet horror. This distinction helps explain why the franchise has always appealed to audiences looking for immediate thrills rather than slow-burn terror. When placed alongside the director's past work, the comparisons highlight both stylistic growth and occasional shortcomings. Bloodlines shows a confidence in staging elaborate set pieces, suggesting the director has learned from previous projects in balancing spectacle with narrative flow. However, there are moments where pacing falters, particularly in the quieter scenes meant to build emotional resonance. Here, the film can feel less assured, especially when compared to the taut suspense of earlier franchise entries. This unevenness suggests that while the director excels in large-scale moments, there is still room for refinement in character-driven storytelling. It is also worth comparing Bloodlines to more recent ensemble horror films such as A Quiet Place or The Conjuring series. These films succeed not only because of their scares but because of the emotional stakes built into their family dynamics. Bloodlines attempts something similar by introducing generational connections, but it does not always achieve the same emotional weight. Where A Quiet Place turns family survival into the core of its suspense, Bloodlines sometimes lets spectacle overshadow its thematic ambitions. Still, the attempt to inject deeper stakes sets it apart from earlier franchise entries that relied almost entirely on shock and spectacle. In terms of ambition, Bloodlines also invites comparison to movies like Cabin in the Woods, which played with horror tropes and audience expectations in inventive ways. While Bloodlines does not reach the same level of meta-commentary, it does attempt to refresh the franchise by layering themes of inheritance and fate on top of the familiar formula. In this sense, it borrows smartly by recognizing that audiences today expect more than just gore and spectacle. They want meaning and resonance beneath the thrills. Ultimately, Final Destination Bloodlines sits at an intersection of tradition and reinvention. It pays tribute to the legacy of the franchise by keeping the elaborate death sequences intact while borrowing stylistic touches from Saw, supernatural dread from The Ring, and emotional stakes from modern family-focused horror. It does not always succeed in balancing all these influences, but it manages to keep the franchise relevant by engaging with broader trends in horror cinema. For longtime fans, the comparisons highlight how far the series has come and where it still has room to grow. For new audiences, Bloodlines serves as both a reminder of why the Final Destination concept is so enduring and a statement that it can still compete within the crowded horror landscape. Symbolism and metaphors play an important role in how Final Destination Bloodlines communicates its deeper meaning beyond the surface-level thrills of elaborate death sequences. While the franchise has always leaned on visual cues to foreshadow danger, this installment layers in more recurring motifs, color choices, and repeated images that add texture to the story. These elements are not only decorative but also serve to echo themes of inevitability, connection, and the fragile boundary between life and death. By looking closely at these patterns, audiences can find richer interpretations of the film's intent, even if the primary focus remains on suspense and spectacle. One of the most consistent visual motifs in Bloodlines is the use of glass and mirrors. Windows, windshields, and reflections appear repeatedly throughout the film, often moments before tragedy strikes. Glass becomes a metaphor for fragility, the idea that life itself is transparent, easily shattered, and vulnerable to unseen forces. In one of the film's earliest sequences, A cracked windshield foreshadows not just a literal accident but also the broader theme of inevitability. Later, when a character catches their own reflection just before their death, the image reinforces the idea that no one can escape the design of fate. Mirrors here do not just reflect bodies, they reflect inevitability. Colors are another powerful tool used to convey meaning. Bloodlines employs a muted palette for its everyday scenes, grounding its characters in a sense of normalcy. However, red often punctuates key moments, sometimes subtly in wardrobe or set design, and other times dramatically in lighting. The color red symbolizes both life and death in this film, vitality on one hand, blood and violence on the other. For example, a character wearing a red scarf in a crowd becomes visually isolated moments before their fate, drawing attention to them as if marked by destiny. The repetition of red as both a warning and an inevitability builds subconscious tension for viewers, signaling that danger is near even before the actual accident unfolds. Repetition of objects is another way Bloodlines weaves metaphor into its narrative. Chains, ropes, and cords appear frequently, often snapping or entangling at critical moments. These objects symbolize both connection and entrapment, reminding audiences that characters are bound together by an unseen design. In one memorable sequence, a dangling chain in a workshop swings eerily before sparking a chain reaction of accidents. Beyond being a clever setup, the image reinforces the metaphor that everyone in the story is tethered to a larger fate they cannot break free from. The chain does not just kill, it represents the unbreakable bond between cause and effect. Vehicles also function as recurring metaphors throughout the film. Cars, buses, and trains symbolize forward momentum, the unstoppable progression of life, and by extension, the inevitability of death. Each vehicle-related sequence underscores the lack of control characters truly have, no matter how carefully they try to steer their lives. This metaphor connects back to earlier films in the franchise, but Bloodlines sharpens it by tying vehicle imagery to family and generational themes. A bus carrying multiple generations of a family becomes more than just a set piece, it becomes a moving metaphor for how fate follows bloodlines and cannot be outrun. Sound and silence also carry symbolic weight in Bloodlines. Recurring auditory motifs, such as a ticking clock or the faint hum of electricity, act as metaphors for time running out and unseen forces waiting to strike. Silence, when used just before an accident, underscores the inevitability of what is about to happen, reminding audiences that death's presence is strongest when it cannot be heard. These auditory symbols elevate suspense, but they also deepen the metaphorical structure of the film, suggesting that death is not only visual but something that exists in the spaces between sound. Even the deaths themselves function as metaphors, not just spectacles. Each one reflects something about the character's personality or circumstances. A character obsessed with control meets a fate caused by something they overlooked, symbolizing the futility of micromanaging life in the face of destiny. Another character who isolates themselves is killed in a crowded public space, underlining the metaphor that no one can truly escape connection to others. These carefully designed sequences push the film beyond gore and shock, allowing audiences to interpret each death as both literal and symbolic. The title itself, Bloodlines, is a metaphor that underscores the entire film. It points to family heritage, generational curses, and the idea that fate is not just individual but inherited. This adds a symbolic weight to the narrative, suggesting that death's design is not random but tied to lineage and ancestry. Characters are not only haunted by their own mistakes but by the invisible threads of family history. The repeated references to parents, siblings, and generational ties throughout the film make this metaphor central, giving Bloodlines a thematic cohesion that earlier entries in the franchise often lacked. By layering in these symbols, glass, color, chains, vehicles, sound, and the very idea of bloodlines, the film crafts a richer narrative than it might first appear to offer. While viewers may initially watch for the elaborate death sequences, those paying attention to these details will find a network of metaphors reinforcing the story's themes of inevitability, fragility, and connection. These elements are not always spelled out but left for the audience to interpret, which makes rewatching rewarding. Final Destination Bloodlines becomes more than a sequence of accidents. It transforms into a meditation on how life and death are mirrored, connected, and carried across generations. Final Destination Bloodlines cannot be discussed in isolation because it belongs to one of the most distinctive horror franchises of the last 2 decades. Since the release of the original Final Destination in 2000, the series has built a reputation on a unique concept: death as an unseen force with a predetermined plan. Unlike traditional horror series where a killer stalks victims, this franchise relies on fate, timing, and elaborate Rube Goldberg-style accidents. Bloodlines enters this legacy with the weight of continuity, fan expectations, and the need to balance homage with innovation. To evaluate its place in franchise or historical context, we have to look at how it uses callbacks, Easter eggs, and whether it expands the larger mythology in meaningful ways. One of the most notable aspects of Bloodlines is how it openly acknowledges the events of earlier films. While some horror franchises ignore or retcon previous entries, this installment chooses to treat continuity as essential. There are references to the Flight 180 disaster from the first film, including background news clippings and subtle mentions of survivors. This not only anchors Bloodlines within the established timeline but also rewards longtime fans who recognize these callbacks. Even small details, like the recurring use of the name Bloodworth, played in past films by Tony Todd, function as Easter eggs that keep the connective tissue alive. Though not every audience member will catch them, these touches demonstrate respect for the franchise's history. In terms of timeline placement, Bloodlines appears to situate itself after the events of Final Destination 5, which famously tied directly into the first film with a looping narrative structure. That choice gave the franchise a closed circle feeling, but Bloodlines reopens the timeline by suggesting that death's design is not limited to one group of survivors but extends through families and generations. This idea expands the mythology significantly, raising the stakes from random chance to something embedded in bloodlines and ancestry. It shifts the focus from isolated incidents to a broader, almost historical pattern, positioning the film as both a continuation and a redefinition of what the series can be. The callbacks are not limited to names or references. Some of the death sequences in Bloodlines echo earlier films while adding a twist. For example, a death involving a gym setting recalls the tanning bed sequence from Final Destination 3, but it is staged differently, with new layers of tension that make it stand on its own. These mirrored scenarios act as homage while also signaling that death's design repeats patterns, which ties neatly into the theme of inevitability. For fans who know the franchise well, spotting these narrative echoes becomes part of the viewing experience. Another important contextual element is how Bloodlines reflects on the evolution of horror since the early 2000s. The first film was released at a time when slashers dominated, but it introduced a fresh twist by removing the killer and replacing it with fate itself. Now, 2 decades later, the horror genre has evolved with elevated storytelling, deeper character work, and more emphasis on emotional stakes. Bloodlines reflects this shift by attempting to weave family themes and generational legacies into the familiar spectacle. In this sense, it places itself historically within the larger trajectory of horror cinema, acknowledging that audiences now expect more than just shock value. For fans looking for Easter eggs, Bloodlines is full of subtle nods. Character surnames sometimes echo those of past survivors or victims, implying distant connections. Locations are revisited, though often reimagined, with new sets that still carry traces of past events. Even the use of recurring auditory cues, like a faint whisper before an accident, recalls techniques from earlier films while expanding them into something new. These touches create continuity without making the film inaccessible to newcomers, striking a careful balance between nostalgia and forward momentum. From a franchise perspective, Bloodlines faces the challenge of answering whether it truly advances the larger story or merely repeats the formula. By shifting focus to generational themes, it arguably does push the mythology forward. Where earlier films dealt with immediate groups of friends or strangers linked by coincidence, Bloodlines suggests that fate operates on a much broader canvas, implicating entire families and lineages. This evolution keeps the franchise from stagnating and opens the door for future entries that could explore even deeper patterns. Historically, Bloodlines also functions as a reminder of how the Final Destination series shaped horror in the 2000s. Its influence can be seen in other films that adopted elaborate death sequences or leaned on the inevitability of fate as a source of dread. The franchise became known for its creative kills and the anxiety it generated about everyday objects and scenarios, from kitchen appliances to freeway traffic. Bloodlines continues this legacy while acknowledging that it is part of a long tradition. Its willingness to revisit and expand this formula shows a self-awareness that strengthens its place in horror history. In conclusion, Final Destination Bloodlines positions itself firmly within the franchise by honoring its roots while adding new layers to the mythology. It uses callbacks, Easter eggs, and timeline connections to reward dedicated fans while expanding the concept to include generational fate, which broadens its scope. By situating itself in this way, the film acknowledges its historical context as both a continuation of a beloved series and as a reflection of how horror has evolved since the franchise began. Whether it is successful in fully advancing the story will be debated, but its placement within the Final Destination timeline and the larger horror landscape makes it an important entry that bridges the past and the future of the series. When examining the budget and box office potential of Final Destination Bloodlines, it is important to first look at what the production spent to bring this latest installment to life and how that number translates to the screen. The reported budget for the film stands at around $45 million, placing it in the mid-range category for a modern horror production. Compared to lower-budget horror films that can achieve massive returns with costs under $20 million, this figure suggests the studio had confidence in the property's brand recognition and invested in delivering both spectacle and quality. The budget not only covers cast salaries and practical production costs, but also the heavy use of visual effects that the franchise is known for. On screen, that $45 million budget feels well utilized. Bloodlines does not come across as overly extravagant, but it avoids the cheapness that sometimes plagues sequels deep into a franchise. The sets are expansive, the locations feel real, and the visual effects sequences, particularly the elaborate death scenes, look polished and high stakes. Audiences familiar with earlier entries will notice a step up in cinematography and production design, giving the film a more cinematic feel rather than a made-for-streaming vibe. The use of large-scale set pieces, including multi-car pileups and mechanical chain reactions, clearly demonstrates where much of the budget went, and the investment pays off by creating moments designed to be memorable and rewatchable. From a marketing standpoint, the film was promoted as both a continuation and a reinvention of the franchise. The studio leaned heavily on nostalgia by reminding audiences of the earlier films while simultaneously presenting Bloodlines as the fresh start that expands the mythology. Trailers highlighted the elaborate death setups, which remain the franchise's signature selling point, but also teased the generational themes that give this installment a broader appeal. The marketing campaign was extensive, spanning traditional media, digital campaigns, and tie-ins with streaming platforms for maximum exposure. That kind of rollout is typical of mid-budget horror designed to attract both longtime fans and casual moviegoers. Box office projections for Final Destination Bloodlines benefit from the franchise's established reputation. Historically, Final Destination films have performed well compared to their budgets, often doubling or tripling production costs globally. For example, earlier entries were produced for under $35 million and grossed well over $100 million worldwide. Given that Bloodlines had a slightly higher budget at $45 million, the studio would be looking at a minimum of $120 to $150 million worldwide to declare it a clear success. Anything beyond that would elevate it into breakout territory. Opening weekend numbers will of course be the first big indicator, but horror films tend to perform differently than blockbusters. Instead of front-loading the box office, they often rely on strong word of mouth to keep audiences returning. If Bloodlines delivers the thrills and surprises fans expect, it could have solid legs at the box office. Repeat viewing potential is also strong because audiences often revisit Final Destination films to spot foreshadowing and Easter eggs they may have missed the first time. This rewatchability helps extend its box office life beyond the first 2 weeks. Another important factor in financial performance is international appeal. Horror tends to travel well, and the Final Destination brand is recognizable globally. Territories in Asia, Europe, and Latin America have historically embraced the series, and the universal theme of escaping fate does not require heavy cultural context to resonate with audiences. The marketing campaign smartly emphasized the spectacle of the death sequences in international trailers, ensuring that language barriers would not limit appeal. This global strategy could significantly boost returns, possibly pushing the worldwide gross past $200 million if word of mouth is positive. Streaming deals and home release revenues will also contribute to the bottom line. In today's market, a mid-budget horror film often finds a second life on digital platforms, where repeat viewing and rentals generate steady income. Bloodlines is positioned well for this, as the franchise's fanbase often enjoys rewatching the films to analyze the design of fate and predict upcoming deaths. These post-theatrical revenue streams make the financial picture more favorable even if the box office numbers are only moderately successful. In terms of financial strategy, Bloodlines punches above its weight. The film looks more expensive than its $45 million budget suggests, with production values closer to those of higher-budget thrillers. This efficiency indicates that the production team maximized resources, focusing spending on the elaborate sequences that define the series while keeping dialogue-driven scenes simple and cost-effective. By channeling resources into the areas that audiences care most about, the film delivers value far beyond its cost. Ultimately, The success of Final Destination Bloodlines at the box office depends on whether audiences embrace its balance of nostalgia and reinvention. If positive reviews highlight the creativity of the death sequences and the effectiveness of its expanded mythology, the film has strong potential to overperform financially. With a modest budget compared to many Hollywood productions, even a solid run will make the film profitable. When compared to earlier franchise entries, Bloodlines appears to be on track to continue the tradition of turning moderate investment into significant global returns, proving once again that the Final Destination formula remains a reliable draw for audiences around the world. When it comes to deciding where to watch Final Destination Bloodlines, the viewing context makes a major difference in how the film is experienced. This is a franchise that thrives on tension, spectacle, and carefully constructed set pieces designed to make viewers squirm. Because of that, seeing the film in theaters is the most impactful option for audiences who want the full immersive effect. The big screen amplifies every detail, from the intricate foreshadowing in the background to the sharp sounds that make audiences jump. The carefully designed death sequences are built to overwhelm the senses, and in a theater setting, the collective reactions from the crowd create an energy that is hard to replicate at home. Shared gasps, nervous laughter, and even the silence before a major shock all add to the experience. If you want to feel the intensity of the franchise as intended, the theater is without question the ideal place. For those who may not be able to catch it in theaters, streaming platforms offer the next best opportunity. With the rise of major digital services, films like Final Destination Bloodlines tend to arrive on premium on-demand first before heading to subscription-based platforms. Watching at home provides the advantage of comfort and convenience, but the impact depends heavily on the setup. A large television with good sound or a quality surround system can still deliver the kind of atmosphere that the film relies on. Horror films in particular benefit from strong audio, as the sound design is a crucial tool for building dread. If theaters are not an option, streaming at home with headphones or a soundbar can help capture the tension the filmmakers intended. Renting the film digitally on platforms that allow premium rentals is another option, especially for audiences who prefer a one-time experience without waiting for a long-term streaming release. This route works best for viewers who enjoy watching with friends or family, since horror often benefits from shared reactions. Hosting a small watch party at home can bring some of the communal energy of a theater into a living room setting. The suspense-driven storytelling and shocking visuals still land well in a group environment, especially when everyone is reacting at the same time. Some audiences may prefer to wait until Final Destination Bloodlines is available on a subscription streaming service. While this option sacrifices the early hype and theater-scale experience, it makes the film more accessible and allows for multiple rewatches without additional cost. For longtime fans who enjoy combing through scenes to spot hidden foreshadowing and Easter eggs, this is a strong advantage. The Final Destination series has always rewarded attentive viewers, and streaming availability makes it easier to pause, rewind, and analyze the setups that hint at future deaths. The choice between theater and home ultimately comes down to what each audience member values most. If you are a fan who thrives on maximum intensity, the big screen is the definitive choice. The film was shot and designed to be larger than life, and every element from sound to visual detail is heightened in that environment. On the other hand, if convenience and comfort are higher priorities, waiting for a streaming release or renting digitally may be the better fit. The film still delivers its core thrills, though the communal reactions and scale of the spectacle may not be as strong. There is also the factor of personal tolerance for horror. Some viewers may actually prefer the safety of their home environment, where they can pause or step away if the tension becomes overwhelming. Final Destination Bloodlines pushes its audience with elaborate and often graphic death sequences, and not everyone wants to experience that intensity in a dark theater surrounded by strangers. At home, viewers have control over the pace, volume, and even lighting, making it a more manageable way to watch for those who find the franchise's shocks especially stressful. For repeat viewing, streaming services or a purchased digital copy are the most practical options. Final Destination films often invite audiences to go back and look for clues they missed on the first watch. Bloodlines continues that tradition, planting subtle details in early scenes that only reveal their meaning after certain deaths occur. Having the ability to revisit those moments multiple times at home can deepen appreciation for the film's craftsmanship. This makes streaming not just convenient but also enriching for fans who like to study how the story is pieced together. In the end, the best way to watch Final Destination Bloodlines depends on what you value most: scale and communal energy in theaters, comfort and convenience with rentals, or long-term engagement on streaming platforms. Each option has its strengths, and the film is versatile enough to deliver thrills across all viewing contexts. If you want to feel every scare exactly as the filmmakers intended, theaters are the way to go. If you want to enjoy the film at your own pace or revisit it multiple times, digital rentals and streaming will serve you well. Final Destination Bloodlines was designed to be both a communal shocker and a rewatchable puzzle, making it a film that adapts to different settings without losing its core impact. If you enjoyed this video and would like us to provide reviews of every kind of movie, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.
Goodbye.